Hello, and welcome to this video on BOPP STEVE, a deconstructed reverb with multiple complementary effects from This Is Not Rocket Science. Here's what's to come in the video. This video is sponsored by This Is Not Rocket Science. BOPP STEVE is said to be a deconstructed reverb that's made up of 40 plus delay lines with various tails and diffusers. This Is Not Rocket Science call it their space effect, a very cinematic stunt reverb. With BOPP STEVE, time, space and pitch are all interlined and make your sounds bigger or even smaller. The manual from This Is Not Rocket Science is great, and they talk about the origins of BOPP STEVE, telling us that it started in the early 2000s with Stein working on a reverb, and that led to the dual delay reverb mode in the Fenix IV, and from there they deconstructed the early reflection elements of a reverb into two parts, a delay and a diffuser, and then created three different types of tails, dense, floating and sparse, and the sparse side is a granular synthesis engine, and that's something that they explored with error instruments on their collaboration module Brinta. And personally, I just really enjoy knowing some background and the story of how things have come to life. So before we get into a more detailed look at the features, the key to understanding this deconstructed approach, This Is Not Rocket Science are calling the line. And the line here is just your signal flow with stereo input going through the diffuser, delay, then tail engine before hitting the stereo output and the mix stage. You can inject pitch shifting at various points within the line, and you create a dry-wet mix for each effect and then your overall mix that you output in stereo. So let's go through the panel here, and at this point I'll say skip ahead to the timing on screen if you just want to get to examples. There's lots of features to walk through here. We start with a stereo input and LEDs to show their activity, and then you first hit a diffuser which has its mix control here going from dry to wet, and an associated flavor control which shifts all pass filters and timings within this diffusion network. We then go into a delay, which again along the line has its dry-wet mix control, and then it's the top left section of the module that has all the delay controls. We have three modes selected on this button with ping pong, waveguide and multitap. Timing is controlled by the length control, and that has a CV input, but there's also a tap tempo button and an external clock input to clock this and then divide and multiply time with the length control. We have feedback that also has a CV control, and each delay mode has a pattern control, and that's different for different things here. For the ping pong, This controls the left and right timings, different ratios of timings in stereo. For the Waveguide, this tilts to lower or high end in this Waveguide. And for Multitap, it's a tilt filter. You can think of that like a DJ style low pass, high pass filter. And the output of the delay then goes into the tail section, which is the top right controls here. And again, we've got 3 different modes. Dense, which is a full, big, rich reverb tail. Float is a smoother, slightly lighter reverb, but it does have an option to be a shimmer effect. And sparse is a minimalistic, granular engine. Length controls the decay time for all 3 modes, going from super short to near infinite on the right. And in the sparse mode, this translates to grain lengths, timings between them, and how the grains delay over time. And you also have a CV input for that tail length, and it's worth noting all the CV inputs add to the knob positions and work within a CV input range of -5 to +5 volts. The chorality control in dense mode, according to This Is Not Rocket Science, adds voices to the choir. It creates a thicker unison through chorus-like effect by adding modulation to the delay lines in the reverb tail. In float mode, it's a lighter, more subtle effect to not get in the way of the shimmer option, and in the sparse tail mode, it controls the probability of grain playback. Temperature, likewise, is slightly different in each mode. On the dense and sparse modes, it's a tilt filter, but in the float mode, it's a dampening effect left from center, and going right from center, it blends in an octave up shimmer effect, and that temperature has a CV input. BOPP STEVE has a button or an external gate input here for a freeze effect, and if you hold this knob, you can then turn off whether the tails or delay, or you can have them both on, will freeze, allowing you to freeze one effect or the other, or even both. On the bottom left, we have a pitch shifting, harmonizing transpose section, which is made up of 3 lines of pitch shifters for you to work with. And the key to this transpose section is that you can choose the pitch point, which is controlled on this button. Pressing the button, you can place this at the start of the chain, going into the diffuser, into the delay after the diffuser, in the delay's feedback path, right before the tail, right at the end of the wet chain, or even just on the dry chain, so you're pitch shifting the dry sound but not the wet elements. The transpose knob has 2 octaves of up or down pitch shift, and that transpose has a CV input which roughly translates to a volt per octave response. There's 3 modes of pitch shifting, with regular giving a quantized monophonic pitch transpose, and in this mode the control knob and CV controls a portamento, adding slew or slide to note changes. The chord mode pitch shifts your sounds into a polyphonic 3-note chord, and the control and the CV over control selects the chord type. There's then a free mode, which is monophonic and unquantized, and the control controls the amount of detune up or down from center of 2 of the 3 pitch shifters. And finally, for this pitch shifter section, we do have a TRS MIDI input. In the regular mode and free mode, the pitch shifters just play and hold the last played MIDI note. In the chord mode, you can play up to 3 notes via MIDI, making your own chords that you just keep playing and changing over time. In the bottom right, we have an envelope section, which is an envelope follower for the dry sound. In the center, that envelope follower is off, and going right from center, we increase the level of this followed envelope based on the input signal, and right at the end of that control, it adds some hold time. Going left of center, we get a flipped or inverted image. It doesn't go through 0 volts into negative voltages, but rather keeps them positive but with a flipped response. This is good for creating ducking or sidechain-like effects either patched into BOPP STEVE's other controls or patched elsewhere into your system. And going left of center, this has the same response of increasing the level, adding hold time as you increase to the highest setting. It's worth noting that during the production of this video, BOPP STEVE had a firmware update that created a smoother envelope follower response time and curve. I've noted in the video where this happens, and that firmware is on the BOPP STEVE page on their website, link down below. And finally, we have the output section here with the main control, and the main control controls the overall dry to wet signal from the whole line of effects. It's worth noting again that the diffuser, the delay, and the tail are all individual dry-wet controls, and the main knob there controls the overall wet level relative to the dry level. We have different ways of approaching this. With the send mix button light off, this goes from fully dry to fully wet. When we press it and that is on, the dry sound is always present, and this just controls the wet level, giving you more range to dial that in across the whole knob turn. And you can press and hold the LED button until it blinks to get a third mode where all the dry and wet sound is always present, but that main knob controls the input level. And you also get a CV input there for that main mix and level control. Your sound's then output in stereo, again with LEDs to show their activity. And that's it for the controls and features. So that took a while, but it's a dense set of features that I found fascinating to play with. I've laid out the video in sections that go down this line, exploring each section in isolation, but also in relation to all the other effects and processing around it. Those patches are all on screen and skippable as links down in the video description, so grab a brew and let's dive in. So here we'll take a look at the diffusion, adding a little bit of lovely soft kind of digital crunch with the chorality and temperature settings. But I'm just starting out with this, just really blissed out, kind of proving the point at how reverb, and certainly this deconstructed approach to reverb, really is just a kind of instrument by itself. My input is a soft Rhodes piano, lots of kind of vinyl motor-like noise, vinyl crackle. And it's just fully blissed out in BOPP Steve. But let's take a look at diffusion. I'll go back to the dry sound, take down the tail and delay diffusions up full. So listen to the front of these notes, the kind of transient, the piano hit coming on. And then we'll get into the kind of softening of them with the diffusion. It's not an obvious ambience. There's this kind of odd sense of reflection. Again, that's dry. It's wider, feels a touch more stereo. And there is a little bit of crunch in moving flavour. Certainly in headphones you can kind of just hear this expand in stereo and contract as I go from dry to wet. So here's a simple patch, but it's just a quick one to highlight that small ambiences can really thicken and widen a sound. Now, the diffuser's doing the heavy lifting here. I'll go fully dry. This is a super saw oscillator into a nice filter. Already sounds great. It's got that kind of rich, great low end and that detune of the super saw. Now, just listening to the diffuser, we kind of go bigger, wider, fatter, cinematic and widescreen if you like, with the diffuser up full and going fully wet. Just goes vroom. And different flavours, create different flavours of stereo image if you like, which is kind of my purpose of the diffuser here. You can hear that delay in the left side a bit more clearly than the right. And it works not just fully wet, but just a blend of it just adds that stereo width and weight. Now with the delay, I have a multitap and using the pattern to thin this out. And being thinner, it's quite a small sounding delay if you like. Just a little bit of it on the mix. It's this nice rhythmic effect between the notes in the sequence. And then for reverb, I wouldn't say it was a small reverb, but just a touch of it. So a big sound on the way in. Small ambiences creating an even bigger sound on the way out. Mainly interested for this example in that mono to stereo-izing effect of the diffuser. Let's explore the ping pong delay with a beat, getting into some heavily modulated delays, and some delay feedback path pitch shifting delays, which has led to this kind of bonkersness. If bonkersness is a word, it certainly applies to this patch. So here's my dry drum beat in my mixer module. This is not going through BOPP and Steve. Now muting it, and just going to the dry sound. My snare drum hit from beat 4 in my 4-beat pattern here is what's coming in. I'm gating a VCA with the beat in it, and that's the input to BOPP and Steve. So as I take this fully wet, delays up full, no tails, no diffusion, clocked with a quarter note, that's the yellow trace there, you can hear this stereo ping pong delay. Feedback is of course feedback. Length adjusts the delay time or the length of delay. And pattern adjusts the left-right timings. So hopefully you can hear how that delay time's changing in the left and right sides of this stereo output. So just that against the beat just works well. I'm sending in every second snare drum and getting a nice ping pong delay. But from there I thought let's have some fun with some heavy modulation. So here's 2 stepped random voltages, one to delay length. And we're getting that nice analog style repitching artifact of modulating delay time. And another stepped random here to feedback. Let's bring the beat back in. And well, this stepped random voltage controlling the length and the feedback is a bit heavy-handed. I do really like the sound of modulated delay lines against beats. And with that in mind, that got me thinking about the pitch shifter, either pitch shifting the sound coming in or putting the pitch shifter in the delay's feedback path. So again, muting the beat, let's remove the modulation and use the pitch point to go to the LED just before delay lighting up, which will put the pitch shifter in front of the delay. So I could pitch up or down, and again, let's throw some random voltage into it. And into delay time and feedback. That against the beat. We've got these interesting pitch shifts in that effects line. But going one further, again muting the beat, let's put the pitch shifter, just removing all modulation there, in the feedback path. And to do this, you adjust the pitch point from the delay to the next position. And with the transpose pitching up, hopefully you can hear this go whoop, 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 whoop. And pitch shift up. Let's try down. Great kind of thundery smears. So again, let's just throw lots of random voltages at it, which is always a good method to hear a lot of sounds very quickly. You can of course be far more intentional So I'm randomizing the delay time, the delay feedback, and the pitch shift with a pitch shifter in the feedback path of the delay. And this is the beauty of BOPP and Steve, this collection of things that work well together. We could also add, say, some shimmer verb. Or non-shimmery verb. Let's put this against the beat again. Intense, heavily modulated, pitch shifter in the feedback, pitch shifting delays. So here's BOPP and Steve working as a full voice, just excited by a couple of little noise hits. So here's my little noise hits, fully dry here on the mix. I'm going to make these really short. So this is noise into VCAs with envelopes, and I've just made those envelopes really super short. You'll hear these just as left and right little clicks in the mix now. Now with delay set to Waveguide, delay up full, let's go fully wet. Length becomes pitch. And a waveguide is like playing a string or a resonator. Feedback becomes like note length. And then pattern here as a tilt filter. And just turning these two, which I'm going to do and kind of gurn and pull faces as I do it. Gosh, too much fun. So the first thing I did here was want the feedback to kind of accent long and short notes, and that's the green trace here with a step sequence. And with different lengths of CV here, different values of CV, we're getting kind of longer, more aggressive feedback, and some less aggressive ones. Then at modulating the length of the delay or delay time with a pitch sequence. And if I freeze a little bit of tail here, it's really different depending on the chorality. So I got to playing with gating the freeze. And BOPP and Steve here, excited by some noise in a VCA. Becomes a whole instrument. And a really fascinating one too. So here's some pretty crazy, chaotic, messy fun creating flangers with the Waveguide. And some nice performative Shimmer reverb throws. Now breaking this down, this is the beat coming in, dry. And removing my modulation here, I'm set to Waveguide, delays up full, and going fully wet. Bit more feedback to get this ringing that bit longer. We've got these short delays, resonator, Waveguide delays on the beat. Now, we can really nicely tilt that on the pattern control. So if we simply add an LFO, and I'm using Wobbler here with its attenuated output, but you could attenuate any other LFO, modulating delay time with the length control gives us a flanger effect. Now coming up, and dropping the feedback down you can be much more subtle. This is mono in, I'm coming out in stereo, and listen to how the diffusion just kind of goes vroom, kind of balloons out really nicely in stereo. It really is kind of night and day, certainly in headphones, just kind of vroom, this kind of expanding stereo. And I like that alongside the flanging. Patching the envelope out here, which is the envelope follower following the amplitude of the input. I'm going to patch this to feedback. It's just making that feedback kind of bloom and dance alongside the dynamics of the input beat. Then turning up some tail. I've got a shimmer reverb set up, and when I hit freeze, these big swells of shimmer reverb. And of course you could just balance all this against the dry wet. So let's explore the multi-tap delay here with rings. Stereo in, and here's the dry sound. It's a rich modulated sound. I might simplify that in a moment. And here's the fully wet sound. The mix is set up to be from fully dry to fully wet. And those multi-taps are meant to give you a denser smattering of delays. It's 3 stereo delay taps at preset ratios of time, all defined by the length, the kind of main delay time control here, working alongside the tap, and then pattern in the multi-tap mode becomes a filter, tilting to duller sounds, left of center, like a low-pass filter, and higher, brighter sounds, like a high-pass filter, to the right. Now let's actually simplify this and make rings. Just a cleaner pluck there. I have my 16th note clock coming in relative to my sequencing of rings. And with pattern in the middle, let's up the feedback. I'll just send one note to rings and then pull it out. You can hear these thick and rich delay trails. And hopefully you can hear those in stereo too. They could be duller. Or brighter. And I'll just cut down this sequence so it's a bit more sparse. Now length within the tap and the clock in the tap there. Allows us to dial in these delay times that all the taps work against. And it creates a very dense, rich ambience all by itself. I mean, just that. And let's bring back some more notes in rings. Backing off the mix with a thick delay wash in the background. This works really well with the diffuser. So it's delaying this smeared version of the sound. Let's go back to that richer, sympathetic string sound on rings. Bring in the delay again. And one interesting thing here, the freeze can actually freeze the delay or the reverb. If we hold the freeze button, you can turn on and off, which will turn all 3 LEDs on there, whether it's the tail, the reverb section, or the delay that gets frozen. So again, if I just send in 1 or 2 notes, 2 rings, freeze it, we have these frozen delay trails. And doing that rhythmically with gate patterns can work really well. And I'm pulling out my cable here that's feeding rings, so our input actually stopped. But if I leave this playing, you can have your input sound be playing while your delay is frozen. So here we're exploring the really big lush space that is the dense reverb tail. I'm modulating the length, the kind of overall size and decay, as well as the temperature, which in this case is a tilt filter. Let's pull the modulation. This is my dry sound from the Monumatic. Temperature in the middle, let's go for a shorter length, no chorality. And as a kind of real reverb space would, I'm making use of the diffusion and the delay, this idea of some reflections before the tail. But let's remove them. Just listen to this tail. And you can hear it's a big, rich, kind of hall-like sound. Chorality is a chorusing in modulation effect within the reverb that's more present in longer, bigger verbs. So we go from this clean, kind of like straight line sheen, if you like, you can hear this pitch shift, this kind of warble that starts to come in, like a chorusing from modulated delay lines in the reverb algorithm. Way more obvious past noon, past the middle point, into full-on kind of vibrato wobbliness. Temperature gets warmer, i.e. duller, like it's low passed. Counterclockwise from noon, and clockwise from noon it gets colder, thinner, like a high pass. Now this will get pretty massive pretty quickly. If I pump this up to halfway and even just remove the input, it's utterly huge. And beyond that, you've loads of room to explore, and that's without actually freezing it, which would freeze and hold that tail too. Bringing the sound back in, and a 50-50 mix. Let's build back to a reverb with some diffusion, some echoes, and that feeding the tail, which I'll take fully wet. Now I'll use a sequence to pull this reverb around with the length control. Go fully wet so you can hear a bit clearer. It's pushing into bigger spaces, snapping it back down. And then I have an LFO here from the wobbler to the temperature. This gives a really nice, almost tremolo-like effect based on that tilt filter. heavily modulated, thick, dense, rich, lush ambience. So here we're exploring float, the ethereal, floating, kind of dreamy reverb tail. Now this is not rocket science to say that float is very ethereal, a smooth, natural decay of your sound, and that together with a shimmering effect that's powered by a 1-octave pitch shifter, it makes for a tail that's kind of light and floating. The chorality here is much more subtle, so it doesn't get in the way of the shimmering effect, and it's the temperature controlled, it's a balancing act between dampening and shimmering. Now, I've done all the kind of things that BOPP STEVE is good at, i.e. the kind of sum of the parts, mixing them together, and I've built a reverb that has diffusion, delays as reflections, and then a big floaty tail. Let's remove the other elements. This is the dry sound. It's a super saw into a nice filter, with some sequenced and envelope modulation of the filter frequency. But coming fully wet here on the tail, I'll just turn down chorality, temperature neutral in the middle, a little bit of a lower length here. And for kind of shorter, cleaner verbs, this is a position that I really like, with a little bit of chorality. It's good for that kind of reflective, roomy, kind of nice, bright, bouncy space. Temperature going left of center. Let's go fully wet. We've got more dampening, and then to the right we blend into this octave up shimmer feedback. And these shimmer effects typically have longer reverbs. So there's the shimmer, chorality all the way down. Or more washy and modulated. You can really get in there and dial in how much of that kind of extreme octave up pitch shimmer you want. And of course, being temperature with a CV input, you can modulate that too. And this does get really long if I just crank up the length and even just pull the input. You can hear these nice floating tails. Let's go a bit longer, maybe a bit of shimmer. And then same kind of thing again, but we'll lose the shimmer and dampen slightly. So here I'm exploring the sparse mode for the tails, and this is not rocket science. Call this minimalistic granular, and ask us to imagine that our audio is a piece of tape that's cut into pieces, and their little bits of sound are played back in reverse or forwards or other orders. They also mention that this mode plays around with the directionality of the stereo field, which gives you the sense of the tail moving around. In this setting, the chorality plays around with the probability that this tape piece will actually be played. The temperature acts as a tilt filter for warmer or colder tails, and the length represents the timing of the pieces of tape being played, so that a long length means the pieces are being played far apart while also decaying over time. Now I'm modulating the length and the temperature. Let's remove that, and here's the dry input. It's a layered and produced set of different electromechanical keyboards, and that's coming in stereo. Now going fully wet, the tail is up full, nothing else is happening in the signal chain. Here's that tilt filter. And it feels quite soft, which is nice and musical, going duller. And also brighter or thinner. Now playing with length. And with a shorter length, let's play around with chorality, which is the probability that these little tape pieces, these grains will play. So it's a nice simple granular engine that works really well against the input sound. So let's take a look at the envelope follower output. Here's a drum beat coming in. And we can add just say a little bit of ambience. But it's the dry input here that is envelope followed, and it's these green cables and trace that is the output. Now if I mute the drums, this controls the filter cutoff and VCA for a simple bass sound. And as I center this at 0 in the middle, we have no output, and going clockwise from center, we reach full level about 2 or 3 o'clock, and then a hold effect which actually holds the envelope open longer than the actual input is holding, or the length of the notes isn't as long as the hold will be. So you can really hear that kick in there. Going counterclockwise or left of center. This is an inverted, or rather mirrored, envelope. It doesn't invert and go through 0 into a negative voltage, but it flips the response of the envelope here. The blue trace on the scope is 0 volts. So if I just bring the drums back in, you can hear this playing in the gaps between the drums. And again we increase. Into this hold stage, and this fading, these nice kind of fading ramps. And this works really well, actually modulating the wet sound on the beat, and self-patching this envelope out. It's kind of one of my favourite things about BOPP and Steve's envelope here. So let's lose the bass. I'll turn down the wet sound in my mix, or rather the mix, this is set to just be a full dry to full wet mix here. So patching this inverted envelope in. With this really interesting kind of sucking and ducking self-modulated effect. If I go positive, we've got quite nice gated reverb effects. With the different mix modes, you could always have the dry present. Maybe push into a bit of that hold time. Again, a nice gated reverb. So here I've made a ducking delay by patching the inverted envelope follower back into the wet level. Now without it, I'll have to add some wet level for us to hear it, maybe a bit more feedback. But it's really nice delay sound. There's a tiny bit of tail and some diffusion. And what's a lovely delay is completely smothering the dry sound. We could filter this multitap delay to be duller to get it out of the way of my dry sharp pluck sound. Or you could high pass it. There's really lovely thin delay sounds from BOPP STEVE here. But it's still kind of smothering the dry sound. So a modern production technique would be to actually sidechain and duck the wet level of your effects against the dry sound, allowing that dry sound to just push through. So it's quite an extreme example here, so you can hear it really clearly. Let's turn down the wet level. We'll leave the feedback where it is. And patching this envelope is inverted into the wet level. You can hear it completely ducks out of the way when these little plucks in the input sound are present, and then blooms up in the spaces in between. Now, as you can see on the scope, this is just ducking right back down to zero. The base level of the wet sound is zero, it's off, and it's the envelope pushing this up. You could of course attenuate this and really tailor it to your sound, but I'm going to leave it as quite an extreme example here. You could also take a copy of this to, say, reverb time, add a bit of tails. We could even be freezing the reverb. So it's kind of gated pulsing of ambience. I quite like it in feedback, and we're creating a ducking delay here. I'll focus on ducking reverbs in a moment. So starting with a bit less feedback, and then patching in. Inverted envelope, modulating the wet level, and the feedback. It's a really lovely way to get a clean, dry sound, but tons of effect around it. So here we're getting into some sidechained reverb, and again, like that ducking delay or sidechain delay example, it's all about having loads of wet effects but not kind of swallowing and smothering the dry sound by ducking the wet sound out of the way when the dry sound plays. Now, there is a different firmware in here with a smoother envelope follower. This is different firmware as opposed to the ducking delay one and the first bit of envelope follower patch you've seen already. So the green trace here is the envelope follower. This is the dry sound. The monumatic from Modular. And there's kind of a lot of sound and tail here, so we're not getting much activity. It's only in those larger gaps where this really swells up. I'm patching the envelope follower out to an attenuator that's just off screen, but it's the red trace here, so you can see the attenuated amount. So if I turn up my attenuator, you'll see that red trace, and this will start to add wet level on BOPP STEVE. And you can hear those. Now, extreme examples are good for video demos, so it's clear this is a bit too extreme for me, and I want some constant reverb all the time. We've got diffusion and delay happening as well, that lovely BOPP STEVE sound. So I'm just going to add a slight amount of wet level here. Not enough to kind of smother the sound, but just so it's constant. And then again, bringing up my attenuator, patching the envelope follower back into the wet level here. really lovely interactive sound, constant reverb bed, and he swells and blooms in the gaps between the notes on the dry sound. So here I'm using BOPP STEVE just as a pitch shifter, and I'm CV modulating and sequencing the transpose. So these kind of expressive extra harmonies, a secondary voice to the main sequence. Here's my sequence that's coming in. Let's take it down to a sine wave. That comes into the input of BOPP STEVE. I have the pitch shifter, the point of pitch shifting, set to just be the dry sound. So if the mix all the way down and the output just being dry, what we'll hear is the transpose, the pitch shifting just on the dry sound. So there's no effects, no delay, no reverb. And here's that pitch shifted output, playing against the dry input. It's like a CV controlled harmoniser. So those are my sources. I'm then articulating them in just a passive low pass gate. The main channel has been struck every 3 steps, and the output of BOPP STEVE, the pitched version, been struck every 4 steps. There's also an LFO panning around the harmonised pitched version from BOPP STEVE. You should hear that shifting around, certainly if you've got headphones on. And it's got this really nice little, like, almost kind of like weird robot digital voicey thing. And it's because the low pass gate notes are kind of ringing on the artifacts of this pitch shifting and bits of the sequence bleeding through the low pass gate. I'm weirdly kind of hearing it as like this almost little pitch shifted animal-y like sound in the background. Might just be me. You can let me know in the comments. And completely secondary to BOPP STEVE, I have an external delay, just washing out both of these sounds. Kind of rounding out my X-Files alien mystery-like soundtrack I've got going with this patch. So here again, I'm just having some fun with BOPP STEVE, and I say just, but it's not a common effect that you can have, just as a pitch shifter. Let's break it down. So this patch starts with a saw wave that's external to this case, but it's the green trace here, and that's all you're listening to, just droning in the mixer. That inputs to BOPP STEVE, which has an arpeggio, a 3-note arpeggio playing on its transpose engine, and that pitch shifting is happening to the dry signal at the output, again with no other effects. We get this blue trace, which is kind of like a diffused kind of wonky supersaw sound. Control here, when we're in the regular pitch shifting mode, affects legato or portamento. Now these layered together, I think works really well. These come down into manic here. Here's that bass saw wave playing just 8th notes. And then BOPP STEVE playing a more rhythmic pattern. These are envelopes modulating the levels in manic here. And I can push in some manual level as well, which is quite fun. These are mixed together and hit this filter. And there's some side chaining on the filter. And that against some drums. It's really fun. If you didn't have a second oscillator, which you could use, and you just want to pitch transpose something that's already happening, that's what I'm doing here to create an upper line to work against my root bass notes. And even over just using a second oscillator, which might be simpler, I like this kind of fuzzy, almost lo-fi supersaw-like sound it gives. There's a kind of nice mushiness to the sound that works well against that dry saw wave. So here's a really fun patch that's built around the chord transposing kind of harmoniser built into BOPP STEVE. And here it's taking a single oscillator waveform and giving me stereo chords to play with, and that's what's led to this patch. So at the start of this patch is a triangle wave. It's the green trace here, and it's a mutable instrument's tides. I'm going to modulate the wave shape with 3 LFOs shortly, just to see how these chords work with a shifting kind of more wavetable-like sound. But the triangle wave is what comes into BOPP STEVE here, and we get stereo chords at the output. So muting the input. Here we have the chords from BOPP STEVE. Now this is the chord mode on the transpose section, giving us 3-note chords harmonising with the input. The control becomes a chord quality, a chord type. And you still have CV over the actual transpose, the kind of root note of the chord. And you could use MIDI. Now I've used pitch point to put this right at the start of the chain. So first things first, let's get the input a bit more interesting. And I am going to use this input here as a layer in the patch, so I don't just want a simple triangle wave. Let's get this moving with 3 LFOs. There's some folding, tilting, slope shifting of that triangle. Let's actually sequence that oscillator. So I have a simple sequence coming in with a modulating tonal harmonic shifting wave. And that's what BOPP STEVE gives us. So muting those, let's get to actually using these in the patch. First I have my input sound just plodding away with 8th notes, kind of ticking away in a filter. I'm then taking the stereo output here into 2 low-pass gates. The one hard left, just struck with a slow clocked rhythm, and the right-hand output, both just in a passive low-pass gate here, has a different rhythm from Tuesday, or rather next Tuesday. So together, stereo chords into 2 low-pass gates, panned hard left and right. And we are just listening to BOPP STEVE through these low-pass gates here. If I kind of smear and smush these around a bit, can diffuse, and even adding a load of reverb, because this sound has been struck in the low-pass gates, it's more like a tonal kind of smush, smear if you like, rather than that clean, no tail, but with the tail. I think it works really well. I then have a bass, which is the harmonic shift oscillator. So between that and the original sound, I just have this kind of bass pulsing root note thing that BOPP STEVE's chords work really nicely on top of. There's then an external delay, it's the Buffaco crush delay, nice noisy PT. So here we're looking at the MIDI Transpose. I'm just playing a MIDI keyboard off screen here, turning down the sound in my VCA. Let's just go through what's going on. I have Ripsaw here, which is a supersaw sound, and just in my mixer droning, just to show you what this input is. Stereo supersaws that are bending the spread of these different oscillators, and also bending towards a more pulse-like sound. So we've got this complex, rich sound source to work with. Now this does have 4 BOPP octave inputs. You may be thinking, well, couldn't you just make chords on there? Well, I could, but in this instance and in this setup, I don't have 4 CVs that I can play, say, from this keyboard, so I should just play around with chords on Ripsaw. So I'm going to transpose them with MIDI to demonstrate the MIDI transpose in BOPP Steve. So this sound is the input, this is the output, fully wet, and the pitch point is right at the start, so the pitch transposition happens before the other effects. This is the sound that's coming in. I'm in chord mode. Both the free and regular would just play monophonically, but in chord mode we can play chords. And if I play monophonically here, nice grungy pitch down. This will play monophonically. But again, we're in chord mode and I can play 3-note chords here. And it will hold this chord as long as I hold it. When I let go, reverts back to the last held note. Now let's wash this out with some diffusion and some verb. Close down the sound in my VCA. All that reverb's bedded in this sound before my VCAs, and I have envelopes here playing for the left and right audio every 3 and 5 steps for a bit of a polymetric overlapping rhythmic pattern. So again, mono playing, or 3-note chords. Big supersaw sounds. Of course, it doesn't have to be big supersaw sounds. There's lots that you can play with here. I just need to show you how this MIDI input worked. So here we've got some massive techno rumbles. Some really big booming ambience with BOPP Steve, but it is all processed through Manic here, clipped and pushed with enhanced stereo with different clipping curves on the left and right sides. Let me break down what's going on. This track has a little bit of the percussion and kick on there, but it's mainly for the hi-hat. I can't isolate all the separate outputs here. I wanted to keep this open 909 style hi-hat free and not going through BOPP Steve. Now muting that. Now if I unmute this in the mixer, this is all coming through BOPP Steve. Taking off the clipping, it's still working well. We're getting this deep rumbling kind of techno rumble, but the glue of clipping and really pushing this is what's giving it that booming kind of dark industrial sound. Now muting the other elements, this is just a 1/4 note kick. If I turn down the tail, you can hear that I've got a nice multitap delay that's filtered back, no feedback. Giving this galloping, almost like psytrance kind of exciting 16th note percussion. Then the tail is just this huge reverb. Let me just pull this a second. And just backing that off to just under where I want it. And then using the envelope follower out here, just following the kick, but in an inverted manner. We're now swelling up after the kick drums, so a little bit of it, plus the modulation of the wet level, or rather the whole mix. Over percussion back in, and when I mute the kick, this just really opens up. And then bringing the kick back in, and sucks it all back in again. I really like that entrance back into the kick. We kind of get a nice little echo before we hear that tail. If you've got this far in the video, drop a BOPP sync in the comments below. What effects are you using with your modular gear? Are you into the idea of deconstructing reverbs and manipulating them like BOPP and Steve does? Thanks for watching. Head to patreon.com/divkid for exclusives and access to the DivKid Discord community, and I'll see you next time. Bye!